Her husband flew her to South Korea, took her passport, froze every account, and vanished, because he was certain a quiet woman would simply go home and disappear. He had no idea that the most dangerous man in Seoul had already noticed her. If you want to know what happened next, stay until the end. Hit like and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. The flight attendant asked Nia if she wanted a blanket somewhere over the Pacific, and Nia said yes, and then sat for 20 minutes without unfolding it, just holding the thing against her chest while the cabin lights dimmed, and Ethan slept in the seat beside her with the practiced ease of a man who had never lost a night's rest in his life. She watched him. That was the part she couldn't explain afterward, that she watched him sleep and felt something close to tenderness even then, even after 12 years of learning exactly what kind of man he was. His mouth was slightly open. His lashes were long, the same lashes she had noticed first across a conference room in Atlanta when she was 24 years old and too young to understand the difference between a man who wanted you and a man who wanted what you represented. His chest rose and fell. Outside the window there was nothing but black and the distant suggestion of clouds below them, and Seoul was still 7 hours away, and Nia Okafor held a folded airline blanket against her sternum and made herself believe. She was good at that. She had been good at it for a long time. She told herself the trip was what he said it was. A reset. A fresh start. Those were his words, delivered 3 weeks ago over a dinner he had actually cooked himself, which should have been the first warning sign because Ethan Cross had not cooked a meal in 4 years. He'd set the table with candles. He had touched her hand. He said, "I know things have been hard. I know that's on me. Let me fix it." And Nia, who had spent the better part of the last 2 years sleeping on the far edge of the mattress and pretending not to hear the late-night phone calls he took in the garage, had looked at those candles and at his hand over hers and chosen to believe him. Because the alternative was admitting that she had wasted 12 years, and she was not ready to do that. Not yet. She finally unfolded the blanket, pulled it up to her chin, and closed her eyes. Around her the cabin hummed and clicked. Someone 3 rows back coughed once and went quiet. Ethan kept sleeping. Nia told herself that Seoul would be the beginning of something, and eventually, from sheer exhaustion, she slept too. She did not dream of anything she could remember. The hotel was extraordinary in the particular way that very expensive things are extraordinary. Quietly, without trying, as though luxury was simply the natural order and anything less would have required effort. The lobby was pale stone and dark wood, and the faint green smell of live plants in enormous ceramic pots. The Han River was visible through floor-to-ceiling glass, silver gray in the early morning, a cargo barge moving across it slowly like something in a dream. Nia stood at the window of their room on the 14th floor while Ethan showered, and she looked at that river and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness, exactly. More like the possibility of happiness, the distant shape of it. The room was 2,000 square feet and smelled like cedar and clean linen. There were fresh flowers on the table, white and architectural, the kind with no scent. The bed was enormous. On the nightstand on her side, someone had placed a small card that said, "Welcome" in English and Korean. She picked it up, set it down. Ethan came out of the bathroom with his hair still damp, knotting his tie, already on the phone. That was how she knew, later. The tie. You didn't knot a tie on your first morning of a fresh start vacation unless you were somewhere you needed to be. "I'll meet you downstairs in 20, he said into the phone, and caught her looking at him, and smiled the smile she used to love, the one that started slow, that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Breakfast," he said. "I need to handle one quick thing. Give me an hour." "It's 7 in the morning. "Time zones," he said. Like that explained anything. She let it go. She always let it go. That was what 12 years of marriage had made her, a woman who knew exactly where the fault lines were and chose every morning not to step on them. She ordered coffee from room service and drank it standing at the window, watching the Han River catch the first real light of the day. A runner moved along the path at the river's edge, tiny from this height, and Nia watched until the figure disappeared around a bend. She thought about calling her mother in Atlanta. She thought about what she would say. She thought about the way her mother's voice sounded whenever she asked about Ethan. Careful, flat, stripped of opinion, and decided against it. She waited. Breakfast came and went cold on the table. She ordered lunch sent up at noon because it gave her something to do. By 3 in the afternoon, she picked up her phone and called him. It rang 8 times and went to voicemail. She set the phone face down on the bed, stood very still for a moment, and then walked to the bathroom and ran cold water over her wrists the way she did when she felt the edges of something dark coming. The water helped. It usually did. She dried her hands, looked at herself in the mirror, dark eyes, sharp jaw, the beginning of something exhausted around her mouth, and said out loud to no one, "He's fine. He got held up." She called again at 5. Voicemail. At 6:30, she went down to the lobby and asked the concierge, a young man with careful English and kind eyes, if Mr. Cross had left a message for the room. The young man checked his screen, checked it again, and told her no. She nodded as though this was information she had expected. She went back upstairs. She sat in the chair by the window until the city outside began to go dark, until the lights across the river multiplied and the water turned the color of oil. And she sat there long past the point when sitting had anything useful to offer. She did not sleep. She lay on top of the covers in her clothes and watched the ceiling and listened to the city and waited for the sound of a key card in the door. It did not come. The note was on the desk. She found it at 20 past 6 in the morning, when the gray light coming off the river was flat and cold, and she had already been awake for an hour, already circling the room in the particular way of a person who suspects something but refuses the final step of confirming it. It was on hotel stationery. His handwriting, that familiar cramped forward-leaning script she had spent years reading on birthday cards and grocery lists, and the occasional apology note slipped under bathroom doors. She picked it up. She read it. She set it back down on the desk very carefully, as though it were something that could shatter. Then she picked it up and read it again, because the first time hadn't fully processed. It wasn't long. Ethan Cross had never been a man who used more words than necessary when fewer would accomplish the same damage. 3 paragraphs. The first said that he was sorry, which was a lie of the particular kind that is constructed out of genuine feeling while remaining a lie entirely. The second explained that he needed to move on and that this was better for both of them, which was not a lie exactly, but was the kind of truth that functions as a weapon. The third paragraph was the one that made her hands go cold. He had, he wrote, taken certain steps to ensure a clean break. By the time she read this, her primary accounts would be inaccessible. Her passport and identification, she checked the nightstand drawer as she read, already knowing what she would not find, had been secured with the rest of his travel documents. He had arranged this, he wrote, so that there could be no impulsive decisions made in anger. He had arranged this. Those words specifically. What he meant was, I have made sure you cannot chase me. I have made sure you cannot stop me. I have left you in a foreign city without money, without identification, without any leverage at all, and I have done this because I know you, Nia. I know you will not make a scene. I know you will be quiet about this, the way you are quiet about everything, and eventually you will find a way to go home, and that will be the end of it. She stood at that desk for a long time. The city moved outside. The river kept doing what rivers do. Somewhere below her window, a delivery truck horn blasted once at something in the street, and birds she couldn't name made sounds she didn't recognize. And Seoul went about the business of being Seoul without any interest in the fact that a woman on the 14th floor of a glass hotel had just had the scaffolding kicked out from under the last 12 years of her life. She put the note in her purse. She did not cry. Not then. What she felt instead was something quieter and more dangerous than grief. A cold stillness, like the moment after a glass hits the floor, but before it breaks. She spent the first day trying the ordinary routes. The American embassy was on Sejong-daero, 20 minutes by taxi from the hotel, and Nia used the last of the local currency in her wallet, 11,000 won, roughly $8, to get there. The waiting room had plastic chairs and fluorescent light, and the particular silence of people who were in bad situations and had run out of energy to be upset about it. She took a number. She waited. A consular officer named Watkins, a heavy-set man in his 40s with the manner of someone who had heard every version of every story, listened to her explain the situation with an expression of professional neutrality. "Your husband took your passport," he said. "Yes." "And froze your accounts?" "Yes." "Are you safe? Has he physically harmed you?" "No, he left. That's what he did." He just left. Watkins wrote something on a form. He told her about emergency passport processing, about the documentation she would need, about the timeline involved. He was not unkind. He was also not fast, and the process he described would take days at minimum, longer if there were complications. And she had $8 in a hotel room that was no longer paid for. She had checked at the front desk that morning, and the reservation, she learned, had been made in Ethan's name and settled with a card that he had since reported stolen, a detail she filed away with a numbness that frightened her when she examined it later. She asked Watkins if there was anything else he could do. He gave her a list of resources: legal aid, emergency contacts, a shelter in the Mapo district with English-speaking staff. He handed her a card with the embassy's number on it. She folded it twice and put it in her purse next to Ethan's note. She walked back toward the hotel because she had no money for a taxi, and because she needed to move, needed the concrete reality of pavement under her feet and wind against her face and the physical fact of her own body in motion. Seoul was enormous and extraordinary and indifferent. People moved past her with the specific urgency of city people, not hostile, just directed, pointed toward places they needed to be. She moved with them and among them and felt completely alone in the way that is only possible in crowds. She did not go to the shelter. She sat in a coffee shop near Yoinaru Station for 4 hours, nursing one Americano, using their Wi-Fi to access the emergency email account she had set up 3 years ago. A small private act of self-preservation she had never been able to explain to herself, except as a feeling, a whisper at the back of her skull that said someday you will need a way out that he doesn't know about. She emailed her mother. She kept the message brief. She said she was in Seoul. She was safe. There had been a complication with Ethan. She needed time. She sent it before she could rewrite it into something more composed. Her mother's response arrived 40 minutes later, at the speed of a woman who kept her phone close. Nia Simone Okafor. I am on the next flight. She typed back, "Don't. I mean it. Let me handle this." She stared at the cursor for a long time before she hit send. Then she sat in that coffee shop until they began stacking chairs at 10 o'clock, and she figured out where she was going to sleep that night, and she did not let herself think past that. She found the room in Mapogu through a posting board at a hostel near the river, a place so far outside the category of anything she had ever stayed that the distance registered as almost abstract. The room was on the 3rd floor of a narrow building wedged between a convenience store and a laundry. The landlady was a small woman in her 70s named Mrs. Bay, who spoke no English and needed 2 weeks' rent up front, which Nia did not have. What Nia had was a pair of diamond stud earrings, a 10-year anniversary gift from Ethan, which struck her, as she unfastened them, as the most appropriate transaction she could imagine. She found a jeweler on a side street off Hongdae who looked at the earrings, looked at her, looked at the earrings again, and gave her a number that she accepted without negotiating because she did not have the energy for it. The number was enough for 2 weeks at Mrs. Bay's, with enough left over for food and a transit card. She paid Mrs. Bay. She got a key and a room that smelled of damp wood and other people's cooking. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed and looked at the wall. The wall was papered in a pattern that had once been white flowers on cream and was now just the memory of white flowers on cream. There was a window that looked at another window 4 feet away across an alley. There was a small lamp with a yellowed shade. There was a hook on the back of the door. She had a single bag with 3 days' worth of clothing, her toiletries, her phone with its cracked lower corner, and a note from her husband folded in her purse. Outside, Seoul made its sounds: motorcycle engines, the percussive clang of kitchen equipment, a couple arguing somewhere below in rapid Korean, the low percussion of bass from a bar 1 street over. Nia Okafor, who had a master's degree in hospitality management and had run the event operations division of the Okafor Cross Group for 7 of the 12 years she'd been married, who had organized dinners for 400 people and managed staff rosters for 15 properties, and once handled a venue fire at a black tie fundraiser in Charlotte without letting any of the guests know there had been a venue fire, sat in a room in Mapogu and gave herself exactly 20 minutes. 20 minutes to feel it, all of it, the humiliation of that note, the specific cruelty of the passport. The 8 years she had spent covering for a man she suspected was stealing from his own company while she managed everything around him with the quiet competence of someone who had learned early that visible ability in a marriage could be a liability. The 2 years of sleeping on the far edge of the mattress, The canceled therapy appointments because he didn't believe in it. The dinner with candles that she now understood had been staged. 20 minutes. She set the timer on her phone. When it went off, she stood up, washed her face in the bathroom down the hall, and came back and sat on the bed with her phone and started making a list. She found the job posting on the third day. She had spent the first two covering the basics, figuring out transit, identifying neighborhoods, making a map in her head of the city's geography, the way she always oriented herself when she arrived somewhere new by walking until she stopped needing the map. She went to the embassy twice more. The emergency passport process was moving. Watkins had told her to expect 10 to 14 business days. She was in regular contact with her mother, who had agreed, with visible effort, not to fly to Seoul as long as Nia checked in every 48 hours. She had put Ethan's number in her block list on the second day after he called 7 times. His calls had started 36 hours after the note. She'd watched the phone vibrate against the surface of the table in Mrs. Bay's kitchen and felt something complicated and cold move through her chest and blocked the number without answering. She had not told anyone what she was doing about Ethan. What she was doing about Ethan was nothing. She was doing nothing on purpose, with intention. She was allowing herself to be unreachable by the man who had made her unreachable. She thought there was a logic to that. The job posting was handwritten on a card pinned to the corkboard inside the entrance of a small expat bookshop near Itaewon, where she had gone because she needed English language print and the Wi-Fi and somewhere warm to sit for an hour. The card said, "Experienced hospitality professional needed. Private club, Han River location. Discretion required. English/Korean dual fluency preferred. Fluency in French or Mandarin advantageous. Compensation competitive. Inquire in person. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 2 to 4 p.m." There was an address in a part of Yeouido she hadn't walked through yet. She looked at the card for a long time. Private club was the phrase she kept coming back to. Not hotel, not restaurant, not any of the corporate hospitality brands where she might have credibility on paper. A private club on the Han River that required discretion and had not put a name on its job listing. She wrote down the address. It was Tuesday. It was 1:15 in the afternoon. The building didn't look like a club from the outside. It looked like nothing from the outside, which she understood immediately was a design choice and not an accident. It sat behind a wall of dense plantings on a stretch of riverfront that had been, according to the development board she had noticed on the walk-in, undergoing quiet luxury redevelopment for the past 3 years. The entrance was a single unmarked door set into pale concrete, with a buzzer and a camera and a small brass plate that had no words on it. She pressed the buzzer. A voice asked in Korean. "I'm here about the position," she said in English. "I saw the card at the Itaewon shop." A pause. Then the door opened. The man inside was young, maybe 25, built like someone whose job involved being built, in a dark suit that fit the way expensive suits fit. He looked at her with the particular assessment of someone trained to evaluate strangers quickly and without expression. "Your name?" "Nia Okafor." He wrote it down on a paper clipboard, which struck her as deliberately analog in a place like this. He asked her to wait and indicated a bench beside a wall on which there were no decorations of any kind, and she sat and waited and looked at the hallway, which was spare and clean and smelled of something dark and woody that she associated with old libraries and money. 5 minutes later, a woman appeared. Korean, 50-something, impeccably put together in the manner of someone who had been impeccable for so long it had become effortless. She looked at Nia the way the young man had, that same rapid professional calculation, but there was more to it, more depth, more specific attention. "Ms. Okafor," the woman said. Her English was excellent, lightly accented. "I am Park Ji-young. I am the operations manager of this facility. We don't typically accept walk-ins, but I was told you came from the Itaewon posting." A pause. "That posting was placed 3 weeks ago. No one suitable has responded until today." Nia held the woman's gaze. "I have 7 years of senior hospitality management experience," she said. "Event operations, staff development, venue management. I've managed properties ranging from 30 to 300 staff. I have a master's in hospitality management from Georgia Tech." She paused. "I also currently don't have my passport, which means I can't work under a formal employment contract. I understand if that's a problem." Park Ji-young looked at her for a long, measuring moment. Why don't you have your passport? My husband took it when he left me in Seoul. Something moved in Park Ji-young's face. Not pity, which Naya would not have been able to tolerate, but something more like recognition, like a woman who had calculated this kind of situation before. Come, Park Ji-young said. I'll show you the facility. The club was extraordinary in the way that genuine money, old money, patient money, money that didn't feel the need to announce itself, expressed itself in a space. Dark paneled walls and deep leather seating, and the Han River occupying an entire wall of glass like a living painting. The bar was restrained and extraordinary. The dining room could seat 40 and was arranged so that every table felt private. There was a library, actual books, actual use-worn leather chairs. There was a room she wasn't shown that had its door closed and two men standing outside it who looked like the young man at the entrance. The members, Park Ji-young explained as she walked Nia through the space, were Seoul's quietest money. Not celebrities, not politicians, exactly. People who preferred that their business be conducted without witnesses. This facility requires someone who understands that what happens here stays here, Park Ji-young said. They were standing in the kitchen, and Naya was cataloging the equipment with the automatic instinct of someone who had done this in 40 venues and couldn't stop herself. The previous operations coordinator retired. We have struggled to find a replacement because most experienced candidates either want too much visibility or too much explanation. Nia turned from the line of stainless prep surfaces. I'm not interested in visibility, she said, and I don't need explanations. Park Ji-young nodded slowly. The compensation, she said, would be paid in cash against a documented personal loan arrangement until your documentation situation is resolved. This is not unusual for us. When your passport is restored, we convert to standard terms. What are you paying? Park Ji-young told her. It was more than she had made in Atlanta. Nia kept her face where it was. When do I start? She said. She learned the club in layers, the way you learned anything that wasn't designed to be learned quickly. The first week was administrative. Park Ji-young walked her through the scheduling systems, the supplier relationships, the protocols for member privacy, the specific ways in which this facility differed from any other she had managed. The main difference, she quickly understood, was not the decor or the clientele or even the money, though the money was considerable. The main difference was the owner. He was never there during her first week. But he was everywhere. In the way the staff moved, not frightened, not servile, but precise, the way people moved when they worked for someone who noticed details. In the way Park Ji-young spoke about policy, always he has requested or he prefers, never abstract institutional language. In the particular atmosphere of the club after 9 o'clock, when the daytime discretion thickened into something else, something with edges she didn't yet have language for, she asked Park Ji-young about him on the 6th day. Park Ji-young was quiet for a moment. Kang Tae-jun, she said, he owns this facility. He owns several businesses in Seoul and overseas. He is, another pause, careful as measuring, a man of significant influence. He is also a man who values competence and dislikes waste in any form. He will notice you. Whether that is to your advantage depends on you. She said it without drama. Like a weather report, Nia filed it. She had spent 12 years in a marriage to a man who used competence as currency, and she understood the particular grammar of powerful men and the people around them. She was not afraid of being noticed. She was afraid only of being misread. She kept doing her job. She identified 3 inefficiencies in the supplier contracts within the first week and sent Park Ji-young a summary with proposed corrections. She reorganized the event calendar for the following month to reduce overlap stress on the kitchen staff. She learned the regulars' names and preferences from the staff before she ever met them, so that when they arrived, she could address them without hesitation. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. She had just spent 12 years being good at it in a context that didn't acknowledge it. She met Kang Tae-jun on a Wednesday evening in the second week, and it happened without announcement. She was at the bar's service end, reviewing that week's beverage inventory against the week's bookings, when she became aware of a change in the room's atmosphere, a subtle pressure shift, the way a room changes when someone with a certain kind of presence enters it. She didn't look up immediately. She finished the line she was reading. When she looked up, he was at the far end of the bar, speaking quietly with the head bartender, and she had exactly enough time to form one impression before he turned. He was younger than she had expected, 40, maybe 42, with the kind of face that had been formed by a series of difficult decisions. Not hard in the cliched sense, not the aggressive jaw-set expression of men who needed their authority to be visible, but contained. Dense with information she couldn't read. He wore a dark suit with no tie, and the ease of someone who had been wearing suits since before he wanted to. He turned and saw her looking and did not look away. Neither did she. That was the thing she would think about later, that she didn't look away, and that this apparently registered because something moved in his expression that wasn't quite surprise but was adjacent to it, like a man recalibrating a calculation. He came to her end of the bar. He said in English, "You're the new operations coordinator." "Yes," she said. "You found 3 errors in the Busan supplier contract that Park Ji-young has been working with for 4 years. They weren't errors," she said. "They were terms that had stopped working in our favor. There's a difference." He looked at her. Not the measuring look the staff gave her, and not Park Ji-young's professional assessment. This was something more specifically interested. "Where are you from?" he said. "Atlanta." "Why are you in Seoul?" She met his eyes. "I was left here," she said. "I decided to stay." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Park Ji-young will send you my schedule for next week. I would like a briefing on the operational changes you're considering." He left the bar. Nia looked back at her inventory sheet. Her hands were completely steady. It was Park Ji-young who told her in the 4th week, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon over tea in the small office behind the kitchen, what kind of man Kang Tae-jun was. Not the word for it. She didn't use the word. She didn't need to. She laid it out in careful, factual language. Certain business interests, certain relationships with municipal and federal authorities, certain reasons why the men at the door were the kind of men at the door, and let Nia come to the conclusion herself. Nia sat with her tea and listened until Park Ji-young finished. "Is there anything else I should know?" she said. "He has not harmed anyone who worked for him in any of his legitimate businesses," Park Ji-young said. "He has not harmed anyone who was honest with him. He has significant problems with people who waste his resources or lie to him." "I don't waste resources," Nia said, "and I don't lie." "I know," Park Ji-young said. "That is why I'm telling you." Nia drank her tea. Outside, the Han River moved past the windows in the gray light of a Seoul afternoon, wide and slow and enormously indifferent, carrying whatever was on its surface towards some destination they couldn't see from here. She thought about Ethan's note in her purse. She thought about the missed calls she still didn't answer. 17 now, over 3 weeks. A number she kept because it told her something about his panic, that she found, if not satisfying, then at least useful. She thought about Mrs. Bay's narrow room, which she was still paying for even though she now had enough to move somewhere else. Because something in her was not ready to let go of it yet, like keeping a bruise to remember where you'd been hit. She set her cup down. "I appreciate you telling me," she said. She went back to work. She was late leaving the club on a Thursday, the 5th week, when she heard Ethan's voice. Not from her phone. In the club. She was in the hallway outside the dining room pulling on her coat, and she heard it through the half-open door, that mid-Atlantic American English, that specific way he had of projecting authority into the register of casual conversation, and her body went cold before her mind caught up. She stood completely still. She breathed through it. She looked through the door's gap. He was at the bar. Dressed well, the charcoal suit he wore when he needed to impress, and he was talking to the head bartender with the confident ease of a man who had walked into hundreds of bars in hundreds of cities and always found them manageable. He had a glass of something. He looked healthy. He looked fine. She put her back against the wall and stood there. He was here, in Seoul, in this building. She thought, he found the club. He tracked her to the club. She thought of the 17 calls and then the silence in the last 2 weeks, and understood that the silence had not been acceptance. It had been search, investigation, patience of the kind Ethan was capable of when sufficiently motivated. He had come to take her home, not out of love. She was done making that mistake. He had come because her silence and her steadiness and her failure to dissolve had cost him something. Sleep, reputation, the specific comfort of a man who likes knowing where his things are. She was not a thing. She stood in that hallway and made a decision with the same cold clarity she had used to make her list in Mrs. Bay's room 5 weeks ago. She straightened her coat. She did not walk back through that door. She walked to Park Ji-young's office and knocked, and when Park Ji-young looked up, she said, "There's a man at the bar. His name is Ethan Cross. He's my husband. I think you should know he's here before Mr. Kang does." Park Ji-young's expression didn't change. She picked up her phone. She made one call, 12 seconds long. She looked at Nia. "Go home," she said. "Mr. Kang has been informed." Nia nodded. She picked up her bag. She walked out of the building into the Seoul night, cold, clear, the river a dark stripe below the lights of the bridges. And she kept walking, and she did not look back. And somewhere behind her, Ethan Cross was sitting at a bar in a building whose owner he had not yet understood he had reason to fear. In her purse, her phone lit up with a call. Not Ethan's number, a number she didn't recognize. She stopped on the pavement above the river, her breath making vapor in the night air, and looked at the screen. She answered it. There was a brief silence, and then a voice. Quiet, unhurried, carrying the specific weight of someone who never needed to raise it. "Ms. Okafor," said Kang Tae-jun, "don't go far. We need to have a conversation." She stood above the Han River with the night around her and her pulse steady, and the city alive with its 10,000 sounds, and she said, "I know." The phone was still warm against her ear when she heard the line go dead, and for a moment she just stood there on that pavement above the Han River with the device in her hand, and the city noise filling in around her like water around something dropped into it. A bus passed on the road behind her, its headlights sweeping across the bridge rail, and she watched the light move and thought about what his voice had sounded like. Not threatening, not urgent, just that particular quality of absolute patience. The voice of a man who had never needed to rush anything in his life because things tended to arrange themselves according to his preference eventually. "Don't go far." She looked at the river. Then she turned and walked back toward the building. The lobby was different when she came back through the door. Not the physical space. The pale stone and the dark wood were exactly as she'd left them 8 minutes ago. But the atmosphere had changed in the specific way of a place where an instruction has been given and received. The young man at the entrance looked at her without surprise, which meant he had been told she would return, which meant Tae-jun had been certain she would return, and she filed that away. "He's in the library," the young man said. She went to the library. It was a room she had catalogued but not spent time in. Real books on 3 walls, a reading table of dark wood with 4 chairs, a single lamp burning on the table, and the Han River doing its slow dark business through the glass on the 4th wall. Tae-jun was standing at that window with his back to her when she came in, jacket off now, the white of his dress shirt very clean in the low light. He did not turn immediately. She did not announce herself. She closed the door behind her and stood and waited, because she understood somehow that this was not rudeness. It was a different kind of conversation, one where the first person to fill the silence lost something. After a moment he turned. He had a glass of water in his hand, not alcohol, and he set it on the table and looked at her with that same dense, recalibrating expression she had seen at the bar 3 weeks ago. "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine standing." He looked at her for 1 beat. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down himself, which she hadn't expected, and the unexpected thing threw her off just slightly, just enough that she pulled out the opposite chair and sat without deciding to. He opened a folder on the table. He turned it so she could see it. "Ethan Michael Cross," he said, 44 years old, Atlanta, Georgia, founder and majority shareholder of the Cross Okafor Group, restructured 3 years ago under the name Cedar Line Asset Partners. He let her look at the paper beneath those words. "Do you know what Cedar Line was using for transaction infrastructure?" She looked at the paper. She looked at him. "No. A shell company called Hanyang Transit Holdings, registered in Incheon. It moved money between Cedar Line's American accounts and 4 different Southeast Asian investment vehicles." He paused. "Hanyang Transit Holdings is registered to a man named Yu Byung-chul. Mr. Yu has worked for my organization for 11 years. The room was very quiet. She heard herself breathe. "Your husband," Tae-jun said, "moved approximately $9 million through infrastructure that belongs to me. Without my knowledge, without permission. using a company name designed to look like legitimate Korean commerce. She kept her face where it was. He didn't know whose infrastructure it was, she said. It wasn't a defense of Ethan. She was past defending Ethan. It was a statement of fact, because facts mattered here. No, Taejun said. He didn't. That is the only reason we are having a conversation instead of something else. He closed the folder. But that changes nothing about what was moved, when, and what it looked like to the authorities who are now looking at it. The authorities, she said carefully, are looking at it. They have been for 7 months. Cedarline has been under financial investigation by the Seoul Financial Intelligence Unit, and, as of 4 months ago, a joint task force with American federal involvement. He said it the way he said everything. Quiet, level, with the steady pressure of someone who had long since stopped needing his facts to be dramatic. Your husband flew you to Seoul, abandoned you without documentation, and left. I think now you understand the timing was not coincidental. She sat with that. She sat with the specific weight of it. The candles, the fresh start speech, the hand over hers, all of it backlit now by this new information, and what it meant was this. Ethan had known. He had known for months that investigators were building something, and he had decided that the cleanest version of his exit included removing her from the country where she had access to their shared legal and financial records, stranding her somewhere she couldn't function, and leaving her to be found looking like an abandoned wife, while he arranged himself into the cleaner position of a man who had simply moved on. He had used her. Not just the way she'd known about. Not just the years of covering and managing and being the steady operational core of a business that bore her name and rewarded his. This was different. This was deliberate positioning. She was supposed to have gone home. She was supposed to be back in Atlanta, bewildered and humiliated, busy with divorce lawyers and explaining herself to her mother, nowhere near Seoul, nowhere near anything useful. She looked at the folder. She looked at Taejun. "What do you want from me?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. Not considering the answer, she had the impression he had known his answer before she walked back through the door. He was giving her time to finish arriving at where she was. "Nothing that costs you anything," he said. "Your husband is going to return. He came here tonight to find you, and he was redirected. He was told you no longer worked here, which he didn't believe, but he left. He will come back." He picked up his water glass, looked at it, set it down. "When he does, I want you to meet with him. Here, in this building." His eyes came up to hers. "I want you to let him say what he came to say. I want him to believe he's managing you. And while he believes that, people who believe they are in control make different decisions than people who know they are not. Worse decisions. Decisions that complete the record that investigators are building." She understood him exactly. "You want me to be the rope he hangs himself with," she said. "I want you to stand still," he said. "That's all. Stand still and tell the truth. Let him do the rest. He's been doing it for years. You just weren't in a position to let it happen before." The lamp on the table made a small, specific light in the room. Outside, the river was dark and the bridge lights threw long shapes across the water. "If I do this," she said, "what do I get? Your passport is currently being held by a man named Cho at a courier facility in Gangnam. By tomorrow morning, it will be delivered to your address." He said it without ceremony. "Additionally, the documentation issue with your employment here will be resolved through channels I won't explain, but that are effective. You will have full legal working status within the week." "That's not all of it." He looked at her. "Whatever Ethan put in my name," she said. "Whatever financial instruments he ran through my signature. I want those separated from anything with his name on it before the investigators make that connection." A pause, longer than the others. "You've been thinking about this," he said. "I've been thinking about everything," she said. "I've had 5 weeks with very little else to do." Something that wasn't quite a smile moved at the corner of his mouth and was gone. He nodded once. "Those arrangements will be made," he said, "provided you're right that they exist." "I'm right." "Then we have an understanding." She stood. He stood. They were the same height, approximately, which she noticed with the peripheral awareness of someone who notices everything and discards what they don't need. "Why are you helping me?" she said. She asked it straight because she didn't have the patience for the version of this conversation where she pretended she wasn't asking. He picked up the folder from the table. Your husband moved money through my infrastructure without permission, he said. He caused me problems I did not choose. I am correcting those problems. He looked at her. You are not a problem I chose either, but you are considerably more useful than I expected. He walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. Ms. Okafor, he said, don't let him see that you know. Whatever he says to you when he comes back, let him believe he's still 10 moves ahead. I've been letting him believe that for 12 years, she said. He left the room. She stood in the library alone for a moment with the river behind her and the lamp's circle of light and the folder's absence on the table, and she breathed in once, slowly, and then she picked up her bag and went home. Her passport was on the floor inside the door when she arrived at Mrs. Bay's at 11:30, just sitting there on the narrow strip of linoleum in a padded envelope with no return address. She picked it up and opened it and looked at her own face looking back at her, the DMV booth expression, the camera-conscious stiffness, and felt something she couldn't immediately name. Not relief exactly, something more structural than relief, like a wall being put back where it belonged. She put it in her bag. She sat on the bed. Her phone had 3 missed calls, all from the same unknown number she didn't recognize, and a text from her mother that said, "Call me when you're home." And she sent back home, "Fine, talking tomorrow." And then she lay back on the bed with her coat still on and stared at the ceiling with its pattern of water-stained plaster that she had memorized 5 weeks ago in the first bad night. And she thought about Ethan at the bar of the club in his charcoal suit, glass in hand, performing the casual authority of a man who had walked into hundreds of bars and found them manageable. She thought about $9 million. She thought about Hanyang Transit Holdings, and a man named Yu, who had worked for Kang Tai-jun for 11 years. She thought about the Joint Task Force, American federal involvement. That was the FBI, maybe Treasury, the kind of investigation that didn't announce itself until it was ready, that moved quietly for months building documentation, building connection maps, building the kind of record that a good lawyer could delay but not defeat. Ethan had known. 7 months ago, minimum. He had known, and he had looked at everything he needed to protect, and he had assessed her. She was quite sure of this now, could feel the cold geometry of it, as a variable he needed to neutralize. Not because she was involved, because she was proximate, because her name was on the business. Because a joint investigation looking at Cedar Line Asset Partners would find the Okafor half of the original Cross Okafor group and would want to know about her. And a present, functional, attorney-equipped Nia Okafor in Atlanta was a much more complicated situation for Ethan than an abandoned, passportless, financially frozen Nia Okafor in Seoul who could spend 6 months trying to get herself sorted out before she had the bandwidth for anything else. He had not tried to harm her. He had tried to park her, and she had refused to be parked. And now she was something he had not planned for, and he had come to the club tonight with his charcoal suit and his managed ease to assess the damage and figure out how to repark her. She could see it perfectly from here. She could see the whole shape of it, the way you could see the whole shape of a thing once you were standing at the right distance. She fell asleep with her coat on and woke at 5 with a gray light coming through the alley window and the laundry 1 floor down already starting its morning cycle, the thrum of the drum running through the building's bones. And she felt something she had been trying not to feel for 5 weeks, settle into something that was almost like clarity. She got up. She washed her face. She went to work. Ushab. He called her the next day. Not from the block number. From a Korean number she didn't recognize, which meant he had either bought a local SIM or borrowed someone's phone. And both of those options told her something about how he was operating here. Careful, adjusting, aware that she had blocked him. He was adapting. She had always known he was smart. She had just forgotten for a while that smart and trustworthy had nothing to do with each other. She let it ring 4 times. Then she answered. Nia. His voice came through with the warmth he deployed at full capacity when he needed something, that particular low register she had spent 12 years learning to read. Thank God. Are you okay? I'm fine, Ethan. I've been worried sick. I had a situation in Atlanta. It was a crisis. I had to move fast. I left things in a way I never should have, and I know you did. A beat. I want to explain. In person. Can we meet? I'm in Seoul. I found out you were working somewhere near Yeouido, and I came to... I know you came, she said. Someone told me. Another beat, slightly longer. She heard him recalibrate through the line. I need to see you, he said. Just an hour. That's all I'm asking. She looked at the Han River through the club's kitchen window. She was standing in the kitchen, had stepped out of a supplier review to take the call, and Park Ji-young was watching her from the doorway with an expression of complete neutrality. Saturday, Nia said. There's a club near Yeouido, on the river. I work there. You can come at 7. The one I went to last night, they told me you didn't book us. Saturday at 7, she said. I'll tell them to expect you. She hung up. Park Ji-young looked at her. Saturday, Nia said. Park Ji-young nodded and went to make the call. Ethan arrived 9 minutes early, which told her he was nervous because Ethan Cross was never early. He arrived at the club's entrance in the same charcoal suit and this time without the ease. It was still there on the surface, that practiced authority. But underneath it, she could see the tightness in his jaw and the way his eyes moved when the young man at the door checked his name, scanning the lobby with a speed that was too quick, too hungry for information. She met him in the dining room. She had chosen the table deliberately, center room, visible from the bar, far enough from the walls that no conversation could be conducted with any privacy. She wore the dark green dress she had bought with her second week's pay, simple and good, and she sat with her hands on the table in front of her and watched him come across the room toward her. He looked tired. That was the first thing. Under the suit and the performance of capability, Ethan Cross looked like a man who had not slept properly in months, and she understood that the investigation was doing that the knowledge of it sitting in him like a stone had been doing that since before the candles and the fresh start speech and the flight to Seoul. He sat down across from her. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she recognized. It was the expression he wore when he was doing rapid real-time calculation, assessing what he was dealing with, what version of her was sitting across from him. You look good, he said. Thank you, she said. This place is... He looked around the room. How did you end up here? I needed work. A posting came up. Who owns it? I don't know much about the ownership structure, she said, perfectly level. He nodded slowly. He picked up the menu the way a man picks something up when he doesn't want to look at the person across from him. And then he set it down, and he looked at her directly with the expression he used when he was about to say something that required the appearance of honesty. I handled it badly, he said, the way I left. I know that. Yes. I was in a bad place. The business was... There were pressures you didn't know about. Okay. The word landed flat, and she watched him register the flatness, watched him absorb the absence of the emotional texture he had expected, the hurt, the anger, the need for explanation that would have given him something to navigate against. She was giving him nothing to navigate against. She was a wall with no handholds. Nia. He leaned forward. I want to fix this. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking for one. I'm asking you to come home. She looked at him. Why? She said. Because you're my wife. That's not a reason. That's a fact. She tilted her head slightly. Why do you want me home, Ethan? Something flickered in his eyes, quick, then gone. Because I love you, he said. She said. She picked up her water glass and drank and set it down. And she held his gaze across the table with a steadiness that she could see was costing him something. Each second of it was costing him, chipping away at the confidence that she would respond the way she had always responded, that she would bend toward his warmth because she needed the warmth. She did not need the warmth. That was the change. That was the 5 weeks of Mrs. Bay's room and the embassy waiting area and the Han River at dawn and Park Ji-young's careful language and Tae-jun's folder on the library table. She did not need his warmth anymore, and he could feel it, and it was making him afraid. There are some things I need to address, he said. Back in the States, legally. Some issues with the business that I need you to... I'm not going back to Atlanta, she said. Silence. Not right now, he said carefully. Not at all, she said. Not for Cedar Line, not for anything connected to Cedar Line. His jaw went tight. There it was. The calculation dropping the warmth, the real Ethan Cross emerging from underneath the performance the way a fist came out from inside a glove. What do you know about Cedar Line? He said. I know my name was on the original incorporation, she said. I know my signature is on documents from the first 2 years of operation. I know that certain restructuring happened after my operational involvement ended. She paused. I know that the restructuring is what interests certain people. He had gone very still. Who have you been talking to? He said. I've been working, she said. I've had time to think. Nia. His voice had dropped. The warmth was completely gone now, and what was underneath it was something she was familiar with. Not violence. Ethan was not a violent man, but the cold, focused energy of a person who had run out of the version of this that was pleasant. I don't know what you think you know, but you need to understand that whoever, is telling you things in this city is operating with an agenda that has nothing to do with your well-being. I know that, she said. Everyone here has an agenda. So do you. I'm your husband. You're the man who took my passport and froze my accounts and left a note on hotel stationery, she said. Still level. Still without heat. The absence of heat was the thing that was breaking him. She could see it. The absence of the emotion he had prepared to manage. You're the man who married me because I was good at running things, and because my name on a business certificate gave it a legitimacy that yours alone didn't. She picked up her glass again. I'm not angry about it, Ethan. I want you to understand that. I'm not angry. Then what are you? She looked at him across the table in the dining room of Kang Tai-jun's private club, with the Han River steady beyond the glass and the staff moving at the edges of the room, and she said, I'm done. He stared at her. I need those documents, he said. Low, flat, the warmth entirely gone. The ones from the first 2 years. The incorporation papers, the operating agreements, the capital structure filings. I need them, and I need a statement from you that your involvement was limited to administrative support, that you had no knowledge of the investment strategy. So there it was. Not reconciliation, a document run. He had come to Seoul to retrieve her as a witness before the witnesses were called. She said nothing. Nia. He was leaning forward now, and under the table she could see his hand on his knee, the knuckles slightly pale. This is not a situation where staying quiet helps you. This is a situation where cooperation is, Mr. Cross. The voice came from behind her, and she watched Ethan's face change as he looked past her shoulder, watched the careful authority drain out of it so completely and so fast that she understood in that moment exactly what Kang Tai-jun's name meant in this city, because she hadn't said it. She hadn't needed to. She did not turn around. She watched Ethan's face instead. Tai-jun came to stand beside the table. Not aggressive, he simply stood there in the dark suit, relaxed, occupying the space with the completeness of a man who occupied every space he chose to enter. He looked at Ethan with an expression that was entirely neutral, entirely without hostility, and somehow that was worse than hostility. I don't believe we've been introduced, Tai-jun said. Ethan was looking at him with the expression of a man running a rapid calculation that was not coming out in his favor. His eyes cut to Nia, back to Tai-jun. Ethan Cross, he said carefully. I know who you are, Tai-jun said. I know considerably more about you than you likely prefer. He pulled out the third chair at the table, not Nia's side, not across from Ethan, but the third position, the one that made himself the apex of the triangle, and sat down with an ease that was somehow more threatening than anything he could have done standing. I understand you've been putting pressure on Ms. Okafor regarding certain documents. This is a private conversation, Ethan said. You're in my building, Tai-jun said, pleasantly. There are no private conversations in my building unless I decide there are. Ethan's jaw was working. She could see him trying to find the footing for this, trying to place Tai-jun in a category he had a response for, and failing because Tai-jun didn't belong to a category Ethan had encountered before. Ethan understood money. He understood authority. He understood the language of American business power, of deals and leverage, and the implicit threats of men in expensive suits. What he was looking at was not that. What documents she does or doesn't provide to any party, Tai-jun said, is entirely her decision. I want to be clear that you will not revisit this conversation with her. I want to be clear about what I mean by that. Are you threatening me? Ethan said. I'm explaining a situation to you, Tai-jun said. Those are different things. A threat is conditional. What I'm telling you is simply true. Ethan looked at Nia. She looked back at him. In his face, she could see the moment the full scope of it arrived. Not just that she had someone standing with her, But the specific weight of who that someone was, the thing the staff's movements had told her in her first week, and that Park Ji-young had laid out in careful, factual language over tea, and she watched him absorb that and watched what it did to him, the calculation failing, the charcoal suit suddenly just fabric on a man who had run out of the kind of moves that worked in this room. "This isn't over," he said to her. She said nothing. He stood. He straightened his jacket with the mechanical precision of a man performing composure because the real thing had left him. He looked at Tai-jun once, a look she filed, a look that contained something she recognized as the specific hatred of a man who had been outmaneuvered in the place he expected to win. And he walked across the dining room and out. The room was quiet. Tae-jun poured water into the glass Ethan had left untouched and set it in front of her. "He'll go to the investigators," he said. "He'll try to offer them something in exchange for a softer position. He will offer them you." She had known that was coming. She had known it from the moment she understood what the document's conversation was. If she wouldn't give them voluntarily, he'd offer her as a person of interest to the investigation and let the investigators compel them. "What happens when he does?" she said. Tae-jun looked at the door Ethan had gone out of. "By the time he makes that call," he said, "the financial records from your period of direct involvement in the original company will show something very specific." He paused. "They will show a woman who flagged irregularities in writing, internally, on 3 separate occasions, and whose flags were overridden by the majority shareholder." He looked at her. "Those records are being prepared right now." She stared at him. "Those records didn't exist yesterday," she said. "No," he said. "You're fabricating documentation." He held her gaze. "I'm correcting a record that was incomplete," he said. "The irregularities existed. You were competent enough to notice them. The documentation of your noticing them simply didn't survive the restructuring." She sat with that. She sat with the weight of what he was doing and what it made her and what she would owe him for it, and whether any of those calculations mattered against the alternative, which was Ethan offering her as a sacrificial variable to a federal investigation. Outside, through the glass, the Han River moved in the dark, enormous and indifferent, and a pleasure boat was crossing it with its lights on. And she watched the lights and breathed and thought about every choice that had led her to this table in this city, and she understood with a cold and quiet certainty that she had just crossed a line she couldn't step back over. "If I let you do this," she said, "I'm inside this. Whatever this is, I can't undo that." "No," he said, "you can't." She looked at him. He looked back. "And if I say no?" she said. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said something she had not expected, something that landed differently than anything else he had said in this room or the library or anywhere. "Then I help you anyway," he said, with less effectiveness. "And you face the investigation on your own terms, which are not as strong as the terms I'm offering, but which are yours." She blinked. "You'd still help me. Your husband put you in my city without resources and expected you to disappear," he said. "That is not something I am comfortable leaving uncorrected, regardless of what you decide." The lamp above the table made its small, specific light. The river was dark and constant beyond the glass. Nia Okafor sat in a chair in the private club of Seoul's most dangerous man and looked at the face of someone who had not once, in all of their conversations, asked her for something she could not afford to give. She thought, "This is the point of no return." She thought, "I passed it 3 weeks ago, and I just didn't know it yet." "Do it," she said. He nodded once. He stood. He paused. "Ms. Okafor," he said, "when your passport was returned to you, did you look at the stamps?" She frowned. "No." "Look at them tonight," he said. He walked out of the dining room. She sat alone at the table, and after a moment she reached into her bag and pulled out her passport and opened it to the entry stamps. Seoul, Incheon Airport, the date of her arrival, and beneath it, in a stamp she had not seen added and did not know when it had appeared, a 6-month residency authorization, not a tourist visa extension. A residency authorization with a reference number and a government seal, and her name spelled correctly in both English and Korean. She closed the passport. She sat for a long time. Then she put it in her bag, stood, gathered her coat, and walked out of the club into the Seoul night. And somewhere in the city, Ethan Cross was making a phone call that would burn the last bridge between them. And she was walking in the opposite direction, and for the first time since she had woken up alone in a hotel room above this river with a note on the desk and nothing in the nightstand drawer, she felt not safe. She was a long way from safe, but something that mattered more than safe. She felt like herself. She looked at the residency stamp for a long time that night in Mrs. Bay's room, sitting on the edge of the narrow bed with the passport open in her lap and the lamp throwing its yellowed light across the page. 6 months. A government seal. Her name in 2 alphabets. She ran her thumb across it the way you ran your thumb across something you weren't sure was real, half expecting it to smear, and it didn't smear. It was dry and permanent and official, in the way that only certain kinds of power could make things official without paperwork you'd ever seen or signed. She closed the passport. She put it under the mattress, which was not a sophisticated hiding place, but was instinctive, and she sat on top of it and looked at the window across the alley and thought about what it meant that a man she had known for 5 weeks had arranged a 6-month residency authorization for a foreign national without asking her and without telling her until after it was done. She thought about what category of power that required. She thought about Park Ji-young's careful language over tea. She thought about those 2 men outside the closed door in the back of the club. She thought, I am inside this now. She thought, I knew that already. I said yes at the table. This is not new information. She lay back on the bed without taking her coat off and stared at the water-stained ceiling and listened to Seoul making its nighttime sounds and waited for fear to arrive. It didn't arrive. What arrived instead was something flatter and more functional, a kind of cold operational clarity, the same thing that had come in the 20 minutes she had given herself in this room on the first night. Assessment. Inventory. What she had. What she owed. What came next. What came next was Ethan making his call. She gave herself until morning. Teet. Park Ji-young found her at 7:15, before the club's kitchen staff had fully arrived, while Nia was standing at the service counter with a coffee she had made herself from the espresso machine because she needed something to do with her hands. Park Ji-young came in from the back corridor in her coat, which meant she had come in early, which meant she had been called. She stood across the counter and looked at Nia with that expression of complete professional neutrality that Nia had come to understand was not coldness, but a form of respect. The face of a woman who did not perform concern for people she thought could handle things. He made contact, Park Ji-young said, last night, 11:42 p.m. The investigators, the Seoul Financial Intelligence Unit. He called a number that belongs to a senior analyst named Kim Jae-won. The call lasted 19 minutes. She set a single printed sheet on the counter. We don't have the content. We have the duration and the metadata. Naya looked at the sheet. 19 minutes is a full conversation, not a voicemail, not an inquiry. No, Park Ji-young said. It was a meeting request. He has an appointment Monday morning at the SFIU field office in Yeongdeungpo. Monday. 2 days. He's offering them me, Naya said. Almost certainly. Park Ji-young picked up the sheet. Mr. Kang is aware. The documentation preparation he mentioned to you last night has been accelerated. Nia drank her coffee. It was too hot, and she drank it anyway, felt it burn the back of her throat, used the sensation to stay present in her own body. There's something else, Park Ji-young said. The way she said it, the slight additional weight, the half-second pause before it, made Nia set her cup down. The analyst, Park Ji-young said. Kim Jae-won. We ran his background this morning. Another pause. He has a prior professional relationship with your husband. 4 years ago, before he joined the SFIU, Kim Jae-won worked as a compliance consultant for a firm in Singapore that did due diligence work for Cedar Line's Asian expansion. The kitchen was very quiet. He worked for Ethan, Naya said, contractually for the Singapore firm, but Cedar Line was the client. Park Ji-young's voice was as flat as a reported fact could be. He left that position 18 months later and took the government post. The timeline means he was onboarded to the SFIU investigation approximately 8 months after Cedar Line became a subject of interest. Nia looked at the espresso machine. She looked at the counter. She looked at her own hands. Ethan didn't approach the investigation, she said slowly. The investigation approached Ethan, through a man Ethan already had a relationship with. That is one interpretation. What's the other interpretation? That Kim Jae-won identified Cedar Line as an investigation target specifically because of his prior access to their structure, and that he has been managing Ethan as an asset inside the investigation rather than as a subject of it. Naya was quiet for a long moment. If Ethan is an asset, she said, then the people the investigation actually wants are the ones he can lead them to, the ones connected to the infrastructure, the ones connected to... She stopped. She looked at Park Ji-young. Park Ji-young looked back at her with an expression that had gone, for the first time, beyond neutrality. Something careful had entered it, something that was adjacent to an apology. "Mr. Kang?" Nia said. Park Ji-young said nothing. "The investigation doesn't want Ethan," Nia said. "Ethan is how they get to Kang Tae-jun. The 9 million through Hanyang Transit was the thread they needed." She heard her own voice saying it and felt the shape of the thing fully for the first time, the full geometry of it, and it was so much larger than she had understood at the library table 2 nights ago that for a moment she couldn't speak. "Ethan has been cooperating," she said, "since before Seoul. He flew me here because..." She stopped again. Started again. "He didn't fly me here to park me away from the Atlanta investigation. He flew me here because Kim Jae-won told him that a visible, distressed, stranded wife in Seoul would attract exactly the kind of attention that would get me inside Tae-jun's operation. He left me here on purpose, knowing I would survive, knowing I would find work, knowing that the only place I could land with my background in this city was..." She stopped. The kitchen was completely silent. She had been planted, not parked, planted. Ethan had not underestimated her. He had calculated her exactly right, her competence, her resilience, her refusal to go home, and he had used those qualities as a delivery mechanism. He had dropped her in Seoul like a stone into water and waited for the ripples to reach the right shore. And they had. She thought about Tae-jun in the library. She thought about his folder. She thought about his voice on the phone saying, "Don't go far," and about the documentation being prepared, and about the residency stamp in her passport, and she thought, he knows. He has to know. A man like that doesn't miss this. She picked up her coffee cup. She set it down. She picked it up again, and then set it down again because her hands needed to do something, and there was nothing useful to do. "Does he know?" she said. "Tae-jun, does he know what I am?" Park Ji-young was quiet for exactly long enough to tell her the answer was complicated. "He knows what you were intended to be," Park Ji-young said carefully. "He knew within the first week." The floor seemed to shift slightly. It didn't. It was solid kitchen tile. It was perfectly solid. But her body registered something that her mind was still processing, a kind of inner lurch. "Within the first week," Nia said. "Yes. He hired me knowing I had been positioned here." "He hired you," Park Ji-young said, "because he looked at you and determined that whatever your husband had planned, you were not part of it. He has considerable experience reading the difference between a person who is running an operation and a person who is being used in one. And he didn't tell me. No." "Why?" Park Ji-young was quiet. "Because," she said finally, "if he had told you in week 1, you would have left. And he needed you to stay." Nia stood with that. She stood with all of it. The library, the folder, the passport stamp, the documentation being prepared, the 6 weeks of feeling like she was finally in a situation where she had clarity and agency and was making real choices, and she understood that she had been making real choices inside a frame that someone else had built. And the specific quality of humiliation that came with that understanding was different from everything Ethan had done to her. What Ethan had done was contemptible. What Tae-jun had done was, she searched for the word, architectural. He had not lied to her. He had simply not told her the whole shape of the building while she was inside it. She breathed. She breathed again. "I need to speak with him," she said. He was in the room off the main corridor, the one with the closed door and the men outside it. But the men stepped aside when she came, which meant he had been told she was coming, which meant Park Ji-young had made a call in the 30 seconds between Nia saying, "I need to speak with him," and Nia walking out of the kitchen. She knocked once and opened the door without waiting. The room was an office, spare, functional, a desk with 2 monitors, a shelf of physical files, no decorations except a single-frame topographical map of Seoul on the wall behind the desk. Tae-jun was at the desk. He looked up when she came in, and his expression did not change, which told her he had known this conversation was coming and had prepared himself for it. She closed the door. She did not sit down. "You knew," she said. "From the beginning." He looked at her steadily. "Yes, you knew I was put here. I knew your husband had reasons for leaving you in Seoul that went beyond what the note said," he said. "I knew within the first week that Kim Jae-won had prior involvement with Cedarline. I drew the reasonable conclusion." "And you hired me anyway?" "Yes, and built documentation for me, and got me residency, and sat across from me in that library and offered me a deal." She kept her voice level. She had learned from him, she realized. That particular discipline of the level voice, the still hands. She had learned it from watching him. "And everything you offered was real." "Yes," he said. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment, not evasive. He didn't do evasion, she had learned that too. But considering, "Because the situation your husband created was real," he said. "Whatever his reasons for putting you here, you were genuinely stranded, you needed work, and you were genuinely qualified. The problems with the supplier contracts were genuinely costing this facility money." He held her gaze. "And what I told you in the library was true. You moved money through my infrastructure without permission. That problem is real regardless of who sent you." "I didn't send myself," she said. "I know that. You've been using me the same way he did." He was quiet. She watched something move in his face, not guilt. Taejun was not a man who wore guilt, but something that was honest in a different way, something that acknowledged the weight of what she'd said without deflecting from it. "Not the same way," he said. "He used you as a tool. I gave you tools. There's a difference." "That's a very fine distinction from where I'm standing." "It is," he said. "I'm not asking you to be comfortable with it." She looked at the map on the wall behind him. Seoul spread across it in topographical lines, the river a thick curve through the center of it, and she thought about standing on the bank of that river 6 weeks ago with $8 in her wallet and a note in her purse and a city she didn't know in every direction. "Kim Jae-won's meeting with Ethan on Monday," she said. "What happens at that meeting?" "Ethan will provide information about Hanyang Transit and its connection to my operation. He will try to position you as an unwitting conduit, someone placed inside my facility to gather operational intelligence. And the documentation you're preparing will show that your involvement was administrative and preceded any connection to my organization by years." He paused. "It will also show that Kim Jae-won's prior professional relationship with Cedarline constitutes a significant conflict of interest in his role as lead analyst on this investigation. That information will be provided to the SFIU's Internal Oversight Division simultaneously with Ethan's Monday meeting." She stared at him. "You're going to blow up the investigation from the inside," she said. "I'm going to introduce sufficient procedural complications that the investigation is required to reassign personnel and re-examine its evidentiary chain from a point approximately 14 months ago," he said. "This will take time. During that time, certain evidence will be reviewed." Reviewed. She understood what that meant. "That's not enough," she said. "Even if Kim Jae-won is removed, the investigation still has Hanyang Transit. It still has the 9 million. You haven't made that disappear." "No," he said. "I haven't." "So what happens to you?" He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. The first time she had seen his composure carry something other than control, something more exposed. He picked up a pen from the desk and held it, not writing with it, just holding it with the slight pressure of a man who had decided to say something he had been not saying. "I have been under investigation before," he said. "I will be under investigation again. This is not a situation I can resolve permanently. I can only manage it." He set the pen down. "What I can resolve permanently is your position in it." She stood very still. "Your documentation will withstand scrutiny," he said. "Your timeline will withstand scrutiny. If Ethan Cross attempts to name you as a knowing participant in anything connected to my organization, he will be contradicted by records that are older than his cooperation agreement, which means his cooperation agreement will look like what it is, a desperate attempt by a man under indictment to purchase leniency by offering names. He'll offer mine specifically because I'm cleanable," she said. "He'll tell them I came here on purpose, that I found the club on purpose, that the whole thing was staged." Yes, Taejun said. He will say all of that. And? And they will find it very difficult to prove intentionality in a woman who filed an emergency passport application at the American Embassy on her second day in Seoul, who paid for a room in Mapogu with the proceeds from selling her own jewelry, and who obtained employment through a handwritten posting card at a public bookshop. He looked at her steadily. The operational footprint of a plant and the operational footprint of a stranded woman making do look very different. Yours looks like a stranded woman making do, because that is what you were. She was quiet. She was quiet for a long time, standing in the spare office with the Seoul map on the wall and the sound of the city outside and the morning light beginning to come through the window's single high pane. What about after? She said finally. After the investigation. After Ethan's meeting and the oversight complaint and the documentation. What am I then? He looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not the calculation, not the density, but something quieter underneath both of those. Something she hadn't seen before. That, he said, is entirely up to you. She almost laughed. Not from humor, from the particular exhaustion of a situation that kept arriving at the same answer no matter which direction she approached it from. She turned and walked to the door and put her hand on the frame, and then she stopped because there was something she needed to say, and she needed to say it to his face. She turned back. I'm not an asset, she said. I'm not a conduit. I'm not a tool, and I'm not a plant, and I'm not a variable in your operational math. She held his gaze. I am the only person in this entire situation who didn't plan to be here. I want you to keep that in front of you. He looked at her for a moment. I know that, he said. Say it like you mean it. Something moved in his face. Quiet. Real. You are the only person in this situation who didn't plan to be here, he said. I know that. I have not forgotten it. She nodded once. She walked out. She was back at Mrs. Bay's by 10, sitting at the small table in the kitchen that Mrs. Bay sometimes let her use, with a cup of the barley tea the old woman kept in a thermos on the counter, when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Not Taejun's number. Not Ethan's Korean SIM. A different number entirely. Seoul area code, but unfamiliar. She answered it. Ms. Okafor. The voice was Korean accented English, male, precise, and professional in the way of someone who chose every word. My name is Kim Jae-won. I'm a senior analyst with the Seoul Financial Intelligence Unit. I'd like to speak with you at your earliest convenience about your connection to a financial investigation currently underway. Her hand tightened on the phone. She kept her breathing even. He had not waited for Monday. He had called her directly, before his meeting with Ethan, before the oversight complaint, before any of the documentation was in place. He had moved up the timeline, which meant he knew it was moving, which meant he had access to information about what was being prepared, which meant there was a source inside the club. She stood up from the table very slowly, the phone at her ear, and she walked to the window of Mrs. Bay's kitchen and looked at the narrow alley below and thought with absolute precision about every person who had been in the room when Taejun described the documentation plan. Herself, Taejun, and one other person who had come in midway through to deliver a message and been waved off but had stood in the doorway for approximately 45 seconds. She thought about that person's face. She thought about the 45 seconds. Ms. Okafor, Kim Jae-won said, are you available to meet this afternoon? She made herself breathe. She made herself think past the cold that was spreading through her chest, past the vertigo of understanding that the source inside the club had access to operational conversations, past the question of how long that access had existed and what else had been heard, past all of it to the single immediate question of what she said. Ms. Okafor, Kim Jae-won said again, are you available to meet this afternoon? She looked at the alley below Mrs. Bay's window. A cat was moving along the top of the opposite wall with the particular precision of something that had learned to navigate narrow spaces, and she watched it and breathed and thought about the 45 seconds in the doorway and the face she had seen, and she made her decision the way she had made every decision in this city, fast, cold, and without the luxury of being certain. Yes, she said. I can meet today. 3 o'clock. There's a cafe on Yeouido, Hangang-ro. I'll text you the address. Fine, she said. She hung up. She stood at the window for exactly 30 seconds, Then she called Tae-jun. He answered on the second ring. Kim Jae-won just called me directly, she said. He wants to meet at 3. He moved up the timeline. A silence, short but heavy. Where are you now? Mrs. Bays. Don't go back to this club before the meeting. Go directly from where you are. His voice was as level as always, but underneath it, something had tightened. I need to know. Did he say anything about the nature of the meeting? What angle he was taking? He said he wanted to talk about my connection to the investigation. He was careful, professional. Another silence. There's a source, she said, inside the club. Someone who was in the doorway when you described the documentation plan. She heard him breathe. I know, he said. You know. I've known there was a leak for 6 days. I didn't know the location of it until this morning. A pause. I'm handling it. Who? She said. He was quiet. Who is it? She said again, flat, no room in her voice for softness. Lee Sung-min, he said, the junior coordinator in event scheduling. She closed her eyes for 1 second. Lee Sung-min was 23 years old. He had worked at the club for 8 months. He brought her coffee every morning without being asked and had helped her fix a scheduling error in her second week with the quiet competence of someone who genuinely cared about the work. She had trusted his face. How long? She said. We believe 3 months. What has he given them? Operational schedules, member attendance patterns, financial routing information for 3 of the club's accounts. A pause. And 2 days ago, the conversation from the library. Everything. The 9 million, the documentation, the residency stamp. Kim Jae-won had all of it before Ethan ever made his call, which meant the Monday meeting was not Ethan's move. It was Kim's. And Ethan was not a cooperating witness driving the investigation. He was a piece being moved by a man who had been inside the operation for 3 months and was now ready to close it. The documentation, she said. Is it ready? Partially. How partially? Enough for your protection. Not yet enough for the procedural complaint against Kim. Another pause. He moved the timeline because he knows we're preparing it. She pressed her free hand flat against the window glass. Cold. Real. She focused on the cold. I'm going to the meeting, she said. I know. What do I say? The truth, he said. Everything you told me in the library about how you came to Seoul, how you found the club, what your work here involved. All of it. Don't fabricate. Don't embellish. The truth is your cleanest defense. And when he asks me about you? A pause. Tell him what you know, Tae-jun said. You are not required to protect me. I want to be clear about that. She stood at the window. That's not what I asked, she said. I asked what I should say about you. A longer pause this time. When he spoke again, something in his voice had shifted. Not weaker, but more direct, the way a man spoke when he decided to stop being careful. Tell him I employed you, compensated you fairly, and treated you with respect, he said. Everything else, the documentation, the oversight complaint, the residency, tell him you were informed of those after the fact, which is true. It's technically true, she said. It is true, he said. Nia. The first name, the first time, landing differently than she expected. Go to the meeting. Say what happened. Come back. She took her hand off the glass. I'll call you after, she said. She hung up and stood in Mrs. Bay's kitchen and let herself feel for exactly 1 minute the full weight of where she was. The source, the analyst, the timeline collapsing. Ethan somewhere in this city about to walk into a meeting that was already 10 moves ahead of him. Lee Sung-min and his morning coffee and his careful competence and 3 months of quiet betrayal. She let herself feel all of it, and then she set it down the way you set down something too heavy to carry while moving, and she went to get her coat. The cafe was the kind of place that existed in every city. Glass front, decent espresso, tables far enough apart that 2 people could have a conversation without being easily overheard. Kim Jae-won was already there when she arrived 4 minutes early. He was younger than she had expected from his voice. Mid-30s, slight build, a face that was pleasant and ordinary in the way of someone who had cultivated ordinariness as a professional asset. He wore a gray suit without a tie and had a coffee in front of him that he hadn't touched. He stood when she came in. Ms. Okafor, thank you for coming. She sat down across from him and did not take off her coat. A small thing. A decision. You said you wanted to talk about the investigation, she said. He looked at her with an expression of practiced openness, the face of a man who wanted her to believe this was a conversation between reasonable people with no pressure attached. She had seen that face before. She had seen it across a dinner table with candles. I appreciate you being willing to meet informally, he said. I want to be transparent with you about where things stand. You're not a target of this investigation. I want you to know that clearly. Okay, she said, but your presence in Seoul, and specifically your employment at a facility owned and operated by Kang Tae-jun, does place you in a position where your cooperation would be valuable. He folded his hands on the table. And where your non-cooperation could create complications for your situation that I'd prefer to help you avoid. There it was, the velvet underneath the pleasant face. What kind of cooperation, she said. We're interested in the operational structure of the club, specifically the financial routing for events involving certain members. Additionally, any information you may have regarding Mr. Kang's business relationships outside the club's visible operations. He paused. We understand you've been given significant access, documentation privileges, administrative oversight. She looked at him. I organize event schedules and supplier contracts, she said. You've also been present for private conversations with Mr. Kang at a level that goes beyond standard hospitality management, he said. We know about the library meeting. We know about Saturday's dining room conversation. He let that sit for a moment. Ms. Okafor, I want to help you. Your husband has provided a significant amount of testimony regarding your role in Cedar Line's operations, and some of that testimony is concerning. For you personally, her jaw tightened. She kept it off her face. What did he say? He's described you as an active participant in Cedar Line's investment strategy. He's provided documentation showing your signature on instruments that go beyond what you've described as administrative involvement. Kim leaned forward slightly. I believe him to be largely wrong about your intent, but intent is difficult to establish without a credible counter-narrative, and right now you don't have one. She thought, the documentation isn't ready. She thought, he's moving now because he knows it's being prepared and wants to lock her into a position before it exists. You want me to provide information about Tae-jun, she said, in exchange for protection from whatever Ethan told you. I want to help you, he said again. You worked for Cedar Line 4 years ago, she said. The table went very quiet. Kim's expression didn't collapse. He was too trained for that. But something behind his eyes recalibrated, and she watched the recalibration happen and felt the particular cold satisfaction of a woman who had spent 12 years reading the faces of people who underestimated her. I don't see how that's relevant, he said carefully. You took the SFIU position 18 months after your Cedar Line contract ended, she said. You were onboarded to the Cedar Line investigation 8 months after joining the unit. You identified Hanyang Transit as the thread to Tae-jun's organization, and you've been managing Ethan Cross as an asset rather than a subject since before I ever arrived in this city. She watched his face. I don't think this investigation is about Cedar Line. I think Cedar Line was the entry point. I think you've been building toward Kang Tae-jun for 3 years, and Ethan's cooperation agreement is the thing that lets you say you found him legitimately. Kim was still. Completely still, in the way of a man who had stopped performing. That's a significant accusation, he said. It's an observation, she said, based on publicly available employment records and a reasonable reading of the timeline. Ms. Okafor. His voice had dropped. The pleasant face was gone. What was under it was harder and more specific. You are in a foreign country. You are employed by a man who runs one of the most active criminal organizations in South Korea. Your husband has implicated you in financial crimes that carry federal exposure in 2 jurisdictions. I am the person in this situation who is offering you a way out. I would think carefully about the tone you're taking. I'm thinking carefully, she said. You have 48 hours to consider my offer. After that, Ethan's testimony stands uncontested, and the documentation from your period of involvement in Cedar Line goes to the Joint Task Force as filed. He stood, picked up his untouched coffee, and looked at her with the expression of a man who is done with the pleasant version of this. I'd like you to understand clearly that Mr. Kang cannot protect you from a federal indictment. Whatever he has told you about his ability to manage this situation, he is miscalculating. He has been miscalculating for 3 months. She looked up at him. 3 months, she said. That's when your source started. Something flickered. Goodbye, Ms. Onafor, he said. The name, wrong. Deliberate mispronunciation. A tiny dominance move, the kind of thing a certain kind of man did when he wanted to close a conversation feeling larger than he had sat down. She said nothing. She watched him walk out. Then she sat alone at the table and stared at the untouched coffee he had left behind, and felt the 48 hours sitting on her chest like a physical weight. And she pulled out her phone and called Tae-jun, and the call went to voicemail. And she called again, and voicemail again. And a cold, specific fear moved through her because Tae-jun always answered. She left the cafe. She came through the club's entrance at a pace she had never used in this building. Fast, direct, past the young man at the door who started to say something and stopped when he saw her face. And she went straight to the corridor and the office, and the door was open, which was wrong. The door was always closed, and when she came through it, the office was empty. The 2 monitors on the desk were dark. The shelf of physical files had 3 gaps in it where folders had been removed. She stood in the empty office and looked at the Seoul map on the wall and felt something she had not felt since the hotel room 6 weeks ago. Not panic, she was past panic, but the vertiginous sensation of a floor disappearing. Park Ji-young appeared in the doorway behind her. Her coat was on. Her face was doing something Nia had not seen it do before. Not the professional neutrality, not the careful language. Something compressed and urgent. Where is he? Nia said. He had to move, Park Ji-young said. The oversight complaint was filed this morning. Kim Jae-won's supervisors contacted the club 2 hours ago requesting a voluntary interview. That request, she paused, was not made through normal procedural channels. It was made through a direct contact inside the SFIU that Kim should not have had access to, which means Kim has someone inside the oversight division too, Nia said. The complaint will be buried before it creates the procedural delay we needed, Park Ji-young said. By tonight. The weight on Nia's chest redistributed itself into something sharper. Lee Sung-min, she said. What happened to Lee Sung-min? Park Ji-young's expression answered before her words did. He's been removed from the building, she said. He was not harmed. He was... She chose the word carefully. Relocated. He will cooperate with the debrief. Nia thought about Lee Sung-min's face. She thought about morning coffee. She thought about the 45 seconds in the doorway, and then she moved that thought aside because there was no time for it. Tae-jun, she said. Where is he? He is managing the situation from a secondary location. Park Ji-young looked at her steadily. He left a message for you. She held out a folded piece of paper. White. The same hotel stationery size as... Nia took it. She opened it. 4 lines, his handwriting. She recognized it from contract annotations she had seen on her desk. Small and precise and extremely legible in the way of a man who wanted to be understood correctly. The documentation for your protection is complete and has been transmitted to 3 separate legal contacts. 1 in Seoul, 1 in Atlanta, 1 in Singapore. Regardless of what happens next, you are covered. Kim Jae-won's conflict of interest file has been sent to 2 journalists and a parliamentary oversight committee. It will not be buried. You do not owe me anything. I want to be clear about that. Meet me at the river. East Bank, Mapo Bridge, South End, 9 p.m. She read it twice. She folded it. She put it in her coat pocket next to her passport, and she looked at Park Ji-young. 9 o'clock, she said. Yes. What happens between now and 9 o'clock? Park Ji-young was quiet for a moment, then, Ethan Cross has been located. He is currently at the Shilla Hotel in Junggu. He has a car booked for 7:30 p.m. and a flight out of Incheon at 10:45. Nia stood completely still. He's running, she said. It appears so. Whatever Kim Jae-won promised him in exchange for his cooperation, he has begun to understand that those promises were... Park Ji-young paused. Optimistic. Nia thought about Ethan with his 7:30 car and his 10:45 flight and his charcoal suit and 12 years of her life folded into a transaction. She thought about the candles. She thought about the note on hotel stationery and the empty nightstand drawer and 11,000 won and the animal instinct of a woman who had survived 6 weeks in a city that had no reason to help her. She thought about what it meant that he was running. If Ethan ran before Monday's meeting, Kim Jae-won lost his primary asset. Without Ethan's testimony, the case against Taejun's organization weakened significantly. Kim would know that. Kim would try to stop it, which meant Kim's next move was not Ethan. Kim's next move was the thing that kept Ethan from running, the thing that made leaving Seoul more dangerous than staying. And the only thing that made leaving more dangerous than staying was if Kim could offer the Joint Task Force something more credible than Ethan's testimony, something like a direct witness, something like Naya. She looked at Park Ji-young. "He's going to move on me before 9 o'clock, she said. "Kim, he's going to try to formally detain me before Ethan gets on that plane." Park Ji-young held her gaze. "That is Mr. Kang's assessment as well," she said. "How long do I have?" Kim left the cafe and went directly to the Yeongdeungpo field office. "Formal detention paperwork." Park Ji-young checked her watch. "Takes approximately 2 hours to process through the Joint Task Force authorization chain. You have, at most, until 6:30. It was 4:47. 1 hour and 43 minutes. Nia looked at the empty office, the dark monitors, the gaps on the shelf where the folders had been, the Seoul map on the wall with its topographical lines showing the shape of a city she had learned street by street out of necessity, a city she hadn't chosen and couldn't leave and had somehow, without planning it, begun to think of as, "I need a car," she said. Park Ji-young looked at her carefully. "Where are you going?" "The Shilla Hotel," Naya said. "I need to talk to Ethan before he runs. If he runs without recanting his testimony about me, the documentation isn't enough. Kim will use the unrecanted testimony to push through the detention regardless, and by the time the legal contact's sorted out, I'll have spent 6 weeks in a holding situation that destroys everything I've built here." Mr. Kang did not suggest. "I know what he suggested," Naya said. "He suggested I meet him at the river at 9 o'clock. I'm going to do that. But first I need Ethan to recant, and the only person who can make Ethan recant is me." She pulled on her coat. "Not by threatening him. Not by offering him anything. By making him understand that the version of this where he uses me as a stepping stone has already closed, and the only version that still exists is the one where he walks away with whatever he can carry." Park Ji-young studied her for a long moment. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and produced a car key. "The black sedan at the rear entrance," she said. "The driver's name is Choi. He knows the city." Nia took the key. She was at the rear door when Park Ji-young called after her. "Miss Okafor?" She stopped. "Whatever he says to you," Park Ji-young said. "Whatever he uses. Remember who you were when you sold your earrings to pay Mrs. Bay." Nia stood at the door for 1 second. Then she went through it into the cold evening air, and the black sedan was where Park Ji-young had said, and Choi was already behind the wheel, and the city was doing what it always did, enormous, indifferent, alive with 10,000 competing purposes. And she got in and said the Shilla Hotel, and felt the car move beneath her, and watched Seoul slide past the windows, and breathed with the controlled deliberateness of a woman who had learned in the last 6 weeks that breathing was the one thing she could always choose. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Ms. Okafor, you have been formally requested for interview at the SFIU Yeongdeungpo office. Voluntary compliance by 6 p.m. is advised. Non-compliance will result in a formal detention order." KJW, she looked at the text. She looked at the city outside the window. She turned the phone face down on the seat beside her and said to Choi, without looking up, "Faster." The sedan accelerated into the Seoul evening, the Han River appearing and disappearing between buildings to her left, orange and darkening under a sky that was going the color of a bruise at the edges. And somewhere in a hotel room in Jonggu, Ethan Cross was packing a bag. And somewhere in a field office in Yeongdeungpo, Kim Jae-won was signing a piece of paper. And somewhere on the east bank of the river, a man was waiting at 9 o'clock who had told her she owed him nothing. And Nia Okafor sat in the back of a moving car in the city that had tried to swallow her whole and felt something she had no name for yet move through her chest like the first warm thing in a very cold season. And the Shilla Hotel was 12 minutes away, and she had 1 hour, and the Shilla Hotel rose out of the Junggu hillside the way expensive things rose in the city. Quietly, without apology, assuming its own right to be exactly where it was. Choi pulled the sedan to the service entrance at 6 minutes past 5, and Nia was out of the car before it fully stopped, moving through the side door with the purposeful stride of someone who belonged in hotel service corridors, which she did, which was one of the few things in the last 6 weeks she had not had to learn from scratch. She knew the layout from the building's publicly available floor plan. She had looked at it in the car, Choi holding his phone over his shoulder while she memorized the elevator bank positions and the room number she had gotten from Park Ji-young in a text that arrived 4 minutes into the drive. Room 1107, 11th floor, north wing. She took the service elevator. The hallway on 11 was the particular silence of expensive hotels in the early evening, that held breath quality between the end of the day and the beginning of the night, when the rooms were full but nobody was in the corridors. Cream carpet, low lighting, the faint engineered smell of something meant to suggest calm. She stood outside 1107. She knocked. A pause. Movement inside. Then Ethan's voice, flat and cautious. "Who is it?" "Nia." A longer pause. The door opened on the security chain. One eye, a strip of his face, the collar of the white shirt he wore when he traveled because it packed without wrinkling. He looked at her the way you looked at something you had been half expecting and half dreading and had not adequately prepared for either way. He closed the door. She heard the chain slide. The door opened. He had been packing. The room showed it. The open suitcase on the luggage rack, the toiletry bag on the bed, the stack of folded shirts with the mechanical precision of a man who had packed hotel rooms so many times, the motions were automatic. His jacket was on the chair. His tie was on top of the jacket. He looked tired in a way that had moved past the ordinary category of tired into something more structural, like a building that had been under load too long. He looked at her. She came inside. She didn't sit. She stood in the center of the room with her coat still on and let him look at her for a moment. Let him take in whatever he saw. She didn't know what he saw, and had stopped at some point in the last 6 weeks needing to know. "Your car's booked for 7:30, she said. His jaw moved. "You're having me watched." "You're in Seoul," she said. "Everyone here is watched by someone. You chose this city." He turned away from her, went to the suitcase, picked up the toiletry bag, set it inside. His hands were doing what her hands did when she needed to move, finding tasks, finding the physical grammar of function when everything else had gone too large to hold. "Nia," he said. He didn't turn around. "Whatever you think you know about Kim—" "I know everything about Kim," she said. "I know about the Singapore firm. I know about the cooperation agreement. I know he moved his timeline up because he knew the oversight complaint was coming, and I know he's filing detention paperwork on me right now because you're about to get on a plane and he needs leverage." She paused. "I know you're running because whatever he promised you in exchange for your testimony, you figured out he can't deliver it." He was still at the suitcase, still not looking at her. "What did he promise you?" she said. A long silence. "Immunity," Ethan said. "Full immunity. Criminal and civil, both jurisdictions." "And you believed him?" "I believed—" He stopped. He set both hands flat on the edge of the suitcase and stood with his head down and his shoulders carrying the weight of something she had watched accumulate for 2 years without understanding its shape. "I believed I had options. I believed I was managing it." "You were never managing it," she said. "Kim was managing you. He needed you to lead him to Taejun, and he used the investigation to do it. Cedar Line was the lever, not the target." She kept her voice even. Not cruel. She was not here to be cruel. "He never had the authority to offer immunity. That decision requires the Joint Task Force's American component, and they were never consulted because Kim was running an operation that his own oversight structure doesn't know the full shape of." Ethan turned around. He looked at her with a face she had not seen before. Not the warmth, not the performance of capability, not even the cold calculation she had seen across the dining room table. Something stripped of all of those. Just a man in a hotel room who had run the numbers and arrived at an answer he couldn't use. "Then I have nothing," he said. "You have a flight at 10:45, she said, "and you have about an hour before Kim realizes you're not going to call him back, after which he stops needing you to anchor his case and starts needing something else. And the something else is me." She looked at him steadily. "So I need you to listen to me very carefully, Ethan. because what I'm about to tell you is the only version of this that works for either of us." He looked at her, really looked at her, the way he hadn't in years, the way you looked at someone when all the other options had closed and this was the only door left. "I'm listening," he said. "You're going to call Kim Jae-won," she said, "right now, before you finish packing. You're going to tell him that you provided testimony regarding my operational involvement in Cedar Line that was inaccurate. You're going to tell him that your characterization of my role was shaped by the personal circumstances of our separation and does not reflect documented reality. You're going to use exactly those words, and you're going to ask for them to be entered into the record of your cooperation agreement as a formal correction." He stared at her. "Why would I do that?" he said. Not a question, a statement of the shape of the thing, the apparent absence of logic. "Because in 40 minutes, she said, 3 separate legal contacts in Seoul, Atlanta, and Singapore are going to receive a documentation package showing your $9 million in Hanyang transit alongside a detailed record of Kim Jae-won's prior professional involvement with Cedar Line. That package is going to the SFIU Parliamentary Oversight Committee and 2 journalists simultaneously." She paused. "When that documentation lands, Kim Jae-won's investigation becomes a liability for everyone connected to it, including the people who accepted his cooperation agreement in good faith, including the people who took testimony from a cooperating witness without properly vetting the witness handler's conflict of interest." She let that sit for exactly the right amount of time. Your cooperation agreement becomes worthless the moment it's established that the man who built it had a 3-year prior relationship with the primary subject's financial network. But a formal correction made before that documentation lands, made voluntarily, on record, puts you on the right side of the timeline. It makes you the person who identified the problem, not the person who was used by it. Ethan's breathing had changed. She could see it, the chest movement, the slight opening of his jaw, the calculation running behind his eyes. And this time the calculation was going differently because the numbers were different, because she had put different numbers in front of him, and she watched it happen and felt nothing about it that she could identify as either satisfaction or sorrow. Just the clean, specific focus of a woman doing the one thing she had always been better at than him. Reading the room, adjusting the variables, making the outcome work. "If I make that call," he said slowly, "and the documentation lands the way you're describing, Kim loses the investigation. The Joint Task Force loses their case. They lose this approach to the case," she said. "They don't lose the underlying material. Hanyang Transit still exists. The 9 million still moved, but without a clean evidentiary chain and without a witness handler who can survive scrutiny, they have to rebuild from the beginning with different personnel." She paused. "That rebuild takes 18 months minimum. In 18 months, a lot of things change." She did not say what changed. She did not need to. Ethan was smart. She had never stopped knowing that, and he could see the shape of 18 months as clearly as she could. "What about me?" he said. "The fraud? The transfers? That doesn't go away." "No," she said. "It doesn't. But that's always been true. Your best version of this was never no consequences. It was manageable consequences with your own attorney and a clean separation from a tainted investigation." She held his gaze. "Make the call, Ethan. Get on your plane. Get a very good lawyer in Atlanta. That's what you have." He looked at her for a long time. "Why are you helping me?" he said, and she thought about that. She thought about it honestly, in the 3 seconds she had before she needed to answer, turning the question over the way you turned something over to see what was on its underside. Why? Not for him. She was clear about that, clean of the old habit of softening herself toward the warmth he had stopped genuinely offering years ago. Not from love, not from the residue of it, not even from mercy exactly. "Because," she said, "this is the fastest way to close this. And I want it closed." He nodded slowly, the way a man nodded when he recognized the truth of something and also recognized it cost him more than he wanted it to. He picked up his phone. He made the call. She listened to him talk to Kim Jae-won's voicemail because Kim didn't answer, and she watched his face while he spoke. Flat, precise, the formal correction delivered in the specific language she had given him. And when he hung up, she took out her own phone and sent a single text to a number Tae Jun had given her 3 weeks ago that she had never used until this moment. Done. She looked at Ethan. He looked at her. There was something left in the room between them. Not warmth, not anger, Not the long accumulated weight of 12 years of specific damage. Something quieter than all of those. The specific silence of two people who had come to the end of something that had taken too long to end. "I'm sorry," he said. She looked at him. She believed him. That was the strange thing. She believed the apology was real, that somewhere inside the calculation and the performance and the $9 million and the hotel stationery note, there was a man who was genuinely sorry, and she held that belief for a moment, and then she let it do what it could do, which was not much, which was not nothing. "I know," she said. She picked up her bag. She went to the door. "Nia." His voice. Quiet. She stopped with her hand on the doorframe and waited. "Were you ever—" He stopped, started again. "The 12 years. Was any of it—" "Yes," she said, without turning around. "Some of it was." She went out. The hallway was the same cream carpet and low light it had been 15 minutes ago, and she walked its length to the service elevator and stood in it on the way down and breathed with the controlled deliberateness she had developed in Mrs. Bay's kitchen and on the Han River bank and in Park Ji-young's office over tea, the practiced breathing of a woman who had learned that the body needed tending regardless of what the mind was doing. The lobby. Choi at the service entrance. The city. She got in the car. She sat in the back seat and did not speak for a minute. And Choi did not speak either because he was a man who understood the particular silence of someone who had just done something that needed a moment before the next thing. Then she said, "The river. Mapo Bridge. South End." "Yes," Choi said. The city moved past the windows. It was full dark now, the Seoul night doing what the Seoul night did. Lights multiplying across the Han, bridges throwing their reflections onto the water, the apartment towers of Yeouido lit from inside like stacked lanterns, and the streets full of the ordinary complicated life of 8 million people, none of whom knew or needed to know about the specific drama of this particular car moving through their city. Her phone buzzed. A text from Park Ji-young. Documentation transmitted. Journalists received. Oversight Committee confirmed receipt. Kim Jae-won has been placed on administrative leave pending review. Effective 1 hour ago. She read it twice. She put the phone in her coat pocket. She thought about Lee Sung-min, who had been 23 years old and had brought her coffee every morning and had spent 3 months feeding information to a man who had used him the way Kim Jae-won used everyone, as a tool with a specific function and a finite useful life. She thought about what had happened to him since being removed from the building, what relocated meant in the grammar of Taejun's world, and she felt something complicated move through her that she didn't resolve, because some things didn't resolve because that was the actual texture of being inside a situation like this one, and she had chosen to be inside it with full information, and that choice carried everything that came with it. She held it. She didn't set it down. Mapo Bridge at 9 o'clock on a cold Seoul night was not empty. Bridges in this city were never empty. But the south end where she came down the steps to the riverbank path was quieter, the pedestrian traffic thin, the path lit by the low lights set into the railing above. The Han was very dark. A barge moved on it at distance, its running light slow and steady. The wind off the water was sharp and clean. He was there. He was standing at the rail where the path curved away from the bridge's base, looking at the water with his hands in the pockets of his coat, not performing anything, just standing there the way a person stood when they were someplace they actually wanted to be. She came down the steps and crossed the path and stood beside him at the rail. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The river moved. "Kim is on administrative leave," she said. "I know." "Ethan's formal correction is on record." "I know." "The documentation is with the journalists." "Yes." She looked at the water. "It's done." "The immediate crisis," he said. "Yes." She turned to look at him. He was looking at the river still, his profile in the bridge light. That face she had spent 2 months reading, that particular density she had learned to distinguish from coldness because it was not coldness. It was the accumulated weight of a man who had been making difficult decisions for so long that careful had become his resting state. "The investigation doesn't go away," she said. "No," he said. "It rebuilds. In a year, 18 months, they come back with cleaner personnel and a stronger evidentiary chain. That's the reality." He paused. But my legal team has 14 months to prepare a response that my legal team could not previously build because Kim Jae-won's conflict of interest contaminated the evidentiary record. He turned to look at her. So the odds are different. Better? More honest, he said. I've never asked for better, just honest. She looked at him for a moment. You knew I would go to Ethan, she said. He was quiet. When Park Ji-young gave me the car key, she said, that was you. You knew I would figure out the detention timeline, and you knew I would go to the Shilla before coming here. You made sure I could. He held her gaze. I thought you might, he said. I didn't know. But you made provision for it. I make provision for a lot of things, he said. That's different from planning. She breathed. I need to ask you something, she said, and I need you to tell me the truth, even if you think the truth is not what I want to hear. All right, he said. When you hired me, she said, when you knew what I was, what Ethan had intended me to be, and you hired me anyway, was any part of that decision about me, or was it entirely about what I was useful for? The river moved beneath them. The barge was farther away now, its lights diminishing. The wind came off the water and she felt it against her face, cold and specific. He was quiet for long enough that she knew he was actually considering the answer rather than constructing one. The first week, he said, it was almost entirely about utility. You were a problem that had arrived in my building that I could either manage or benefit from, and I chose to benefit from it. He paused. The second week, I read the incident reports from your first week. The supplier contract corrections, the scheduling restructure, the way the staff talked about you in the kitchen. He paused again. I've employed a great number of people. I've been in rooms with a great number of people who are operating under pressure. And I knew by the end of the second week that whatever your husband had planned, he had made a very specific miscalculation about what kind of person he was dealing with. She looked at him. What kind of person is that? She said. Someone who doesn't perform competence, he said. Someone who just is it without needing you to notice. Something in his expression shifted. Not the composure dropping, but something moving beneath it. Something more exposed than she had seen in the office or the library or any of the rooms they had used for their careful transactional conversations. That is not common. In my experience, it is extremely rare. And I found it. He considered the word with the specific care of a man who did not use words carelessly. Remarkable. She held his gaze. Something moved through her chest. Warm and real, and not at all what she had planned to feel on this riverbank at this hour, and she let it move rather than stopping it, the way she had let herself feel the 20 minutes in Mrs. Bay's room on the first night, fully, without management, because some things deserve to be felt without management. I have a 6-month residency stamp, she said. Yes. What happens at 6 months? You apply for renewal, he said. Or you don't. That's your decision. And the job? The job exists as long as you want it, he said, on terms that are entirely yours. She turned back to the river. She thought about Atlanta. She thought about her mother's voice, careful and flat, and stripped of opinion, and about the apartment she had subleased 18 months ago when she and Ethan had moved into the house in Buckhead that bore both their names and felt like neither of their homes. She thought about the conference room where she had been 24 and noticed his lashes. She thought about 12 years of being the operational core of something that never once put her name at the center. She thought about Mrs. Bay's room, the water-stained ceiling, the alley window, 11,001 and a pair of earrings and a list made on a phone at 2 a.m. She thought about Park Ji-young handing her a car key. She thought about Taejun's 4 lines on folded paper. You do not owe me anything. I'm not staying because of you, she said. Not unkindly, as a fact which was the only way she knew how to say things that mattered. I know that, he said. I'm staying because I built something here, she said. In 6 weeks, with nothing. I built something here and it belongs to me and I'm not leaving it. Yes, he said. And whatever this is, she gestured between them, a small movement, economical. It develops on my terms and my timeline. I'm not interested in being anyone's anything. Not again. He looked at her with that expression she had spent 2 months learning, the one that looked like control but was actually a kind of attention, the specific quality of a man who is genuinely listening. I'm not interested in that either, he said. What I am interested in, he paused, and for the first time in their entire acquaintance, she saw something in his face that resembled slightly the expression of a man who was uncertain, who was standing at the edge of something and had not yet decided to step. Is whatever you decide this becomes. She looked at him. He looked back. The Han River moved beneath the bridge in the dark and cold, wide and indifferent and enormously old, having carried everything placed on its surface toward the sea for longer than any of them had existed, longer than any of the decisions made on its banks, longer than any of the damage or the repair or the strange accidental grace of two people standing at a railing in the night air, learning the shape of something neither of them had planned. She took her hands out of her coat pockets. She put one on the railing. After a moment, he put his beside it. Not touching. Beside. They stood like that for a while, and the city made its sounds around them, and the river made its sound beneath them, and the lights of Seoul reflected in the water in long, shimmering columns of orange and white, and Nia Okafor, who had sold her earrings to pay for a room she no longer needed, who had learned a city street by street out of pure necessity, who had walked into a building with no name on the door and made herself indispensable, who had sat across from the man who had tried to use her as a delivery mechanism and given him the only way out that also protected her, who had stood in a library and said, "I'm not an asset," and meant it absolutely, stood at the edge of the Han River at 9 o'clock on a cold night and felt the full weight of what she had built in 6 weeks from nothing, and felt it hold. The divorce papers arrived by courier 3 weeks later, processed through an Atlanta attorney at Ethan's instruction. She signed them at the small table in the office behind the club's kitchen, with Park Ji-young as witness, using a pen from the cup on the desk, and the whole thing took 4 minutes. She had thought it would feel larger. It felt exactly the right size. Ethan Cross was arrested at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport on a Tuesday morning 6 days after that, coming off a connecting flight from Singapore. 2 federal agents, a warrant covering wire fraud and securities violations, and the particular public humiliation of handcuffs in a terminal where 3 journalists were present because someone had made a phone call that morning to 3 journalists. She did not make that call. She did not need to know who did. Kim Jae-won resigned from the SFIU under the Parliamentary Oversight Committee's recommendation and was referred to the Independent Prosecutor's Office for an investigation into his conduct. The case against Kang Tae-jun's organization was formally suspended pending review of the evidentiary chain. 2 reporters published concurrent pieces on the same Sunday morning, drawing on documentation sources they declined to identify, that outlined in considerable detail the conflict of interest at the investigation's core. The pieces were read very widely. She moved out of Mrs. Bay's room on a Saturday in late November, which was cold enough that she could see her breath in the alley, and she stood for a moment in the narrow doorway with her bag and looked at the building's front, its stacked windows, its wedged-in posture between the convenience store and the laundry, its total indifference to her feelings about it, and she felt unexpectedly something close to gratitude, not for what had happened there, for what she had been there, for the list made on the phone at 2 in the morning, and the 20 minutes on the edge of the bed, and the cold water over her wrists in the bathroom down the hall. She had been someone there who she needed to know she could be. She had needed to know that before anything else. She took a photograph of the building's front door. She didn't know why. She put her phone away and picked up her bag and walked to the end of the alley toward the street, and Seoul opened up in front of her the way it always did, enormous, layered, indifferent, and full of the specific kind of possibility that only existed in cities that didn't care whether you made it or not. She had made it. Not because of Tae-jun, not despite him. Adjacent to him, in the particular way that 2 people who were both too self-possessed to lean on anyone managed to stand close enough to matter. She was at the service counter of the club's kitchen, reviewing the December event calendar, when he appeared in the doorway at the end of a Thursday. He had his coat on, which meant he was leaving or had just arrived, and he stopped in the doorway the way he had stopped in doorways all the months she had known him, without the need to announce himself, occupying the frame with a quietness that was somehow larger than noise. She looked up. He looked at her. "Good evening," she said. "Good evening," he said. She went back to the calendar. He came into the kitchen. He He stopped at the counter across from her, the same counter where Park Ji-young had placed the sheet of paper on that first morning. And he stood there with his hands loose at his sides, and she kept working, and after a moment she heard him make a very small sound that was the closest thing to a laugh she had heard from him in 3 months of knowing him. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. She looked up. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before, or rather, an expression she had seen in pieces, in fragments, in the specific moments when the composure had shifted to admit something more unguarded. And now it was all present at once. The density and the attention and the thing underneath both of those that had no operational name, that was simply what it was. "I need to review the December 15th booking with you," she said. "All right," he said. "The kitchen is running a reduced crew that evening, and the member count exceeds our standard ratio. What do you recommend? Either reduce the confirmed attendees or bring in 2 additional kitchen staff from the Seongdong location." "Seongdong," he said. "Do it." "Done," she said. She made the note. She looked up. He was still looking at her. "Was there something else?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I was wondering," he said, with the careful precision of a man choosing every word with full knowledge of its weight, "whether you might want to walk along the river tonight, after you finish." She looked at him. She thought about the residency stamp. She thought about 6 months, and what came after 6 months, and the particular meaning of a choice made freely, completely freely, by a person who had rebuilt themselves from 11,000 won and a pair of earrings and a list in the dark. She thought about the railing, his hand beside hers, not touching. "Give me an hour," she said. Something in his face settled. Not relief, because Tae-jun did not perform relief, but a kind of quiet arriving, the way a room felt when the last door closed and the wind stopped and you could hear the actual silence underneath everything. "An hour," he said. He left the kitchen. She looked at the December calendar for a moment without seeing it, and then she saw it, and she finished her notes, and she closed the folder, and she went to get her coat. Outside, the Han River waited in the dark the way it always waited, wide, cold, indifferent, having no opinion whatsoever about the people on its banks or what they chose to do with what they had survived. And the city threw its light across the water, and the night was very clear, and Seoul spread in every direction under a sky sharp enough to cut on, and Nia Okafor walked out into it like a woman who had earned the ground beneath her feet, which she had, one day at a time, one choice at a time, in a city that had tried to swallow her whole and had instead, without meaning to, given her back herself. She walked toward the river. She didn't look back.